The Spanish Armada of 1588 was the most powerful military and naval force of its day, containing over 108 warships, 22 armed merchant galleons, a large merchant ship capable of carrying hundreds of soldiers, 17,000 armed servicemen, and 7,000 sailors crewed this monster fleet. In their way of total domination of Europe was a tiny fleet by comparison. Sailing from England, it consisted of just 30 warships and 163 hastily armed merchant vessels not ready for fleet-on-fleet combat. This was all that was left of the Tudor navy. Bloody family affairs had caused England's final line of defense to fall into disrepair. Despite the overwhelming odds in the Spanish favor, the Armada would be defeated and totally annihilated in a series of brutal engagements and poor misfortune. The story begins 30 years earlier, when Queen Mary, often referred to as Bloody Mary for her brutal methods of condemning Protestant Christians, died. Her younger half-sister rose to the crown as Queen Elizabeth. Queen Mary's consort was King Philip II of Spain. With the death of his wife, he no longer had control over English affairs, and he immediately sought to rectify that by proposing marriage to Elizabeth, but the new queen, as she so famously did with all men, turned him down. Unable to reassert Catholic dominance over the wayward island nation, Philip declared the queen a heretic and made numerous attempts to support her overthrow by Elizabeth's heir presumptive, Queen Mary, Queen of Scots. Elizabeth retaliated by supporting the Dutch revolt against Spain. Well aware of how her father's navy had deteriorated in the decades of family squabbling, Elizabeth funded merchant captains and crews to raid Spanish shipping in a practice known as privateering. Privateering is when a vessel is given permission by its government in the form of a letter of marque to raid the shipping of another sovereign country. It is essentially state-sponsored piracy, and the best of these privateering captains was a man named Francis Drake. Born in 1544, Drake was a farmer's son and the eldest of 12 children. Unable to support such a large family, his father apprenticed him to a neighbor who was in the shipping business. Drake quickly impressed his superiors with his ability to handle a ship, and he was promoted to captain in 1570. Drake spent the next 10 years terrorizing the Spanish. His most lucrative privateering operation against them was when he took the silver treasure train in 1573, and his circumnavigation of the globe in 1577 to 1580 made him a continuous thorn in the side of the Spanish, who called him El Dragón, the dragon. Upon his return to England, he was knighted as Sir Francis Drake and ordered to take command of the failing Tudor navy. He spent the next 7 years building up the fleet as best he could, recruiting fellow privateers and their vessels to the cause. Drake was a skilled seaman, and he knew that no amount of time could possibly prepare the English fleet to face up against the Spanish. He had to use the time available to him. In 1588, that time ran out. From all accounts, Philip initially favored a triple-pronged attack. First, there would be a diversionary raid on Scotland, while the main armada fought to establish a safe anchorage, either in the Isle of Wight or in Southampton. Once it was established, the armada would then sail back across the channel to pick up the army, led by the experienced Duke of Parma, who was a good friend of the king. The army would then march ashore in England and take London for themselves. From the beginning, the Spanish were plagued by misfortune. The commander of the Armada, who was the highly experienced Álvaro de Bazan, the first Marquis of Santa Cruz, a man born into a military family whose father and grandfather served Spain during the reign of Philip's predecessor, Charles V, died before the fleet could set sail, and his second in command, the Duke of Medina Sidonia, was selected to lead. The Duke was a seasoned soldier, but a poor sailor. His position came about due to his high-born status as a member of the courtier. When the fleet set sail, they were pushed back by fierce winds in the Bay of Biscay, which forced 5 ships to turn back. Meanwhile, the English were having a dose of poor luck of their own. 55 ships, which constituted the bulk of the English navy at this time, sighted anchor in Plymouth Harbor, unable to sail due to the strong tides that held them back. With the Spanish rapidly approaching, a change of fortune was needed. Drake was not worried, and reports say during this time that he was seen playing a golf game. The tides did eventually turn, and as soon as they did, Drake ordered the fleet to set sail. On paper, the coming battle was anything but a fair fight. The Spanish outnumbered the English 5-1. Their ships were better equipped with heavier guns, and their men were better trained in hand-to-hand combat, the preferred style of the day. Ships rarely fought one another in a line of battle, as they would in the 18th century. Vessels were used primarily as transport for troops, who would, upon tying off to an enemy vessel, storm aboard and overwhelm the crew of their opponent. The Spanish formation was impenetrable. From the air, it appeared as a crescent moon with 2 prongs, the fastest ships out in front. The important vessels were kept back toward the center, forcing any attacking fleet to sail through the gauntlet of ships on either side of them. But Drake had spent his time wisely and devised a cunning strategy. He knew the English fleet's strengths over the Spanish, and felt if he could break the Spanish formation down to size, his fleet might have a chance. As night fell, he ordered 8 of his own vessels to be covered in tar and set alight, sails set to drive them into the Spanish fleet. There is no greater fear to a sailor on the sea than fire, and so it was also true in 1588. The Spanish fleet cut their anchors and scattered. With over half of his fleet either becalmed or run aground in the shallows, the Duke of Medina Sidonia was easy prey for the English. Unlike their Spanish counterparts, which were designed mainly for hauling soldiers, the smaller English vessels were lighter and more maneuverable. Though lacking in heavy firepower, they had a greater rate of fire than the Spanish, and were able to keep their distance from their opponents, thus preventing a bloody hand-to-hand combat scenario that surely would have seen a Spanish victory. Driven back by the aggressive English in the costly Battle of Gravelines, Medina Sidonia was forced to retreat, his plan to link up with the Duke of Parma in ruins. And the English did not let up. Although low on firepower, they were led by the ever-aggressive Drake and his second-in-command, Howard, one of Drake's contemporaries and a competent sea captain in his own right. The Spanish were driven up the coast into the North Sea, and from there, the wind conditions, coupled with the presence of the English behind them, made it impossible for the Spanish to turn around. The Armada was forced to circumnavigate the British Isles on their way back to Spain, and the results were nothing short of catastrophic. Every time a vessel left port in the age of sail, she was under a time limit, for there was a menace that stalked her crews, striking and decimating them without warning. This menace was scurvy. Scurvy is caused by a lack of vitamin C, which is most commonly found in fresh vegetables. Produce, however, quickly turns rotten out at sea, and after 6 weeks with no replenishment, the human body quickly runs out of its vitamin C reserves. Scurvy then takes hold, and it starts in the joints and extremities. Teeth fall out, and gums bleed at the lightest touch. Joints swell as they destabilize, and muscles lose their firmness. Your body turns to mush, and it is the most painful and slow way to die imaginable. At the height of the age of sail, over 50% of sailors who embarked would not make their final destination, as they would succumb to the disease. Scurvy decimated the Spanish Armada, which returned to Spain with less than 10,000 men still alive. Hundreds were near death and would die in the days following. Philip, always a gloomy sort even before the short-lived war, upon hearing of the disaster, declared, "I sent the Armada against men, not God's winds and waves." The day and the war belonged to a jubilant England, but victory came at a cost. In order to achieve their stunning victory, England had made alliances with several nations against the Spanish, most notably the Dutch. These allies now grew wary of England's sudden shift in power. The island nation stood victorious, but also alone.